The story of Sean William DeBevoise, who would one day call himself Nigel Max Edge, begins like that of so many young Americans whose lives were forever altered by a single catastrophic event. He was just a junior in high school on September 11, 2001, when the world watched in horror as planes struck the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. For a generation of young men and women, this was a defining moment, a call to action that would shape their futures in profound ways. The attacks ignited a fire of patriotism across the nation, and for Sean, that fire pointed him in one clear direction: military service. He felt compelled to defend his country, to be part of the response to this unprecedented act of terror on American soil. This decision was not made lightly. It was a choice born from a sense of duty and a desire to contribute to something larger than himself. Like many of his peers, he saw enlistment as the most direct way to stand up for the values he believed in. The United States Marine Corps, with its storied history and reputation for toughness, discipline, and unwavering commitment, appealed to his youthful idealism and drive. He chose to become one of the few, the proud. This decision set him on a path that would take him far from his home and high school hallways, leading him into some of the most dangerous and volatile regions of the world, a journey from which he would return a fundamentally changed man. The transition from civilian teenager to a U.S. Marine is a grueling and transformative process, designed to break an individual down and rebuild them as part of a cohesive, unshakable unit. Sean embraced this challenge, successfully navigating the rigors of boot camp and the specialized training that followed. He was preparing for a world at war, a reality that was no longer a distant headline but his own imminent future. His initial deployments would take him to places like Haiti, but the true test of his training and his spirit would come with his service in Iraq. He went there not once but twice, stepping into the heart of a complex and brutal conflict that was claiming lives and altering landscapes both externally and internally. His early years in the military were characterized by the same sense of purpose that had driven him to enlist. He was a part of a brotherhood, united in a common mission. This period of his life was about structure, discipline, and a clear chain of command. The rules were straightforward, and the objectives, at least from his perspective on the ground, were clear. He was doing what he had signed up to do, serving his country in a time of war. But the realities of combat are far harsher than any training can fully prepare a person for, and the experiences awaiting him in Iraq would inflict wounds far deeper than anyone could have anticipated, setting the stage for a long and difficult battle that would continue long after he left the battlefield. Sean DeBevoise's service in the U.S. Marine Corps placed him directly in the crucible of the Iraq War. During a deployment in 2006, his life was irrevocably altered by a series of traumatic events. The battlefield is a place of chaos and violence, where the lines between safety and danger can blur in an instant. According to his own accounts, which would later form the basis of his writings and legal filings, he sustained severe and life-changing injuries. He claimed that he was not just wounded by the enemy, but was a victim of friendly fire, a devastating occurrence where a soldier is harmed by their own side. This belief would become a central and painful theme in his life story, a deep wound that went beyond the physical. The injuries he described were catastrophic. He alleged that he was shot in the head, an injury that by all accounts should have been fatal. The trauma did not end there. In his book, he would later write about being shot a total of 4 times by his own men after he had engaged and killed enemy insurgents. He claimed that after being wounded, he was not aided, but abandoned, left for dead inside a locked warehouse. Whether these events occurred exactly as he described them or were a product of the immense trauma and confusion of combat, they formed his new reality. He survived, but he was no longer the same person who had deployed to Iraq. The physical damage was immense, but the psychological impact was just as profound. The official diagnosis he received pointed to the severity of his condition. Medical professionals diagnosed him with a severe traumatic brain injury, or TBI. A TBI can fundamentally change a person's personality, cognitive function, and emotional regulation. It's an invisible wound that can be more debilitating than any visible scar. For Sean, the TBI was a constant presence, a fog that clouded his thinking and altered his perception of the world. It was a physical injury to the very organ that governs who we are. The damage from a gunshot wound to the head, coupled with the sheer psychological horror of the events he experienced, created a perfect storm for a lifetime of struggle. His time in the military, which began with such patriotic fervor, ended with a medical discharge. He was a decorated veteran, a man who had sacrificed his health in the service of his country, but he was also deeply wounded. The structure and camaraderie of the Marine Corps were gone, replaced by a civilian world that he no longer recognized, and that seemed unable to understand what he had been through. He was left to navigate a new life with a brain that had been rewired by trauma, carrying with him the physical pain of his injuries and the heavy psychological burden of what he believed was a profound betrayal by the very institution he had sworn to serve. Returning home from war is a difficult transition for any soldier, but for Sean DeBevoise, it was a journey into a bewildering and frightening new landscape. The traumatic brain injury he sustained in Iraq was not a simple wound that could be stitched up and healed. It was a fundamental disruption to his brain's ability to process information, manage emotions, and perceive reality. On top of the TBI, he was also diagnosed with schizophrenia and disorganized thinking. This combination of conditions is incredibly challenging, creating a constant state of internal turmoil. Schizophrenia can cause hallucinations, delusions, and paranoia, while disorganized thinking makes it nearly impossible to form coherent thoughts or communicate clearly. Imagine trying to navigate your daily life when you can't trust your own mind. This was Sean's new reality. The world can become a threatening and confusing place, where it's difficult to distinguish between what is real and what is a symptom of a mental health crisis. For veterans struggling with such severe conditions, simple tasks can become monumental challenges. Holding a job, maintaining relationships, and even just communicating with others can feel impossible. The pride and discipline that defined him as a Marine were now clashing with a mind that felt fractured and unreliable, leading to immense frustration, isolation, and a growing sense of being misunderstood by everyone around him. The support systems that are supposed to be in place for returning veterans can often feel inadequate, especially for those with complex, overlapping diagnoses like TBI and schizophrenia. Navigating the bureaucracy of healthcare and veteran services can be a daunting battle in itself. Sean's experiences, as he would later describe them in his lawsuits, were filled with feelings of being dismissed, misdiagnosed, and mistreated by the very systems designed to help him. This sense of institutional betrayal, which began with the friendly fire incident he described, now seemed to extend to the post-service care he was receiving, deepening his paranoia and mistrust of authority figures, including doctors and government officials. This internal battle manifested in his external behavior. His thinking became increasingly paranoid, and he started to see conspiracies and hidden motives in the actions of those around him. The world was no longer a place of straightforward missions and clear enemies. It was a web of secret plots and hidden agendas, all seemingly aimed at him. This paranoid worldview is a common, though tragic, outcome of his specific combination of trauma and mental illness. His mind, in an effort to make sense of the chaos it was experiencing, began to construct elaborate narratives to explain his suffering, narratives that would grow more complex and bizarre as the years went on, pulling him further away from the shared reality of those around him. In the midst of his profound personal struggles, Sean DeBevoise sought a new purpose, a way to anchor himself in the civilian world. Like many veterans, he looked for a path that offered independence and a connection to something tangible and peaceful. He decided to start a fishing business, an occupation that promised quiet days on the water, far from the chaos that plagued his mind. This dream represented more than just a job. It was a chance at a new identity, a way to rebuild his life on his own terms. To make this dream a reality, he needed a boat, and for that, he needed capital that he did not have. He turned to the modern tool of community fundraising, a GoFundMe campaign. He presented his story to the public, sharing his background as a wounded veteran who needed a helping hand to get back on his feet. His appeal resonated with people. The story of a Marine who had sacrificed for his country and was now trying to build a peaceful life was a powerful one. Donors from all over contributed to his cause. Moved by his service and his ambition, the campaign was a success, raising approximately $18,488. This was enough for him to purchase the vessel that would be the centerpiece of his new enterprise. The boat was not just a tool for a business, it was a symbol of hope, a tangible result of community support, and a vessel for his dreams of a tranquil future. With the funds raised, Sean purchased a single-engine fishing boat. This boat was meant to be his office, his sanctuary, and his path to self-sufficiency. For a time, it seemed like this new chapter might offer the peace he so desperately needed. The open water can be a therapeutic environment, and the routine of preparing the boat, heading out to sea, and focusing on the task of fishing can provide a sense of structure and calm. He was no longer just a wounded veteran defined by his past, he was a small business owner, a fisherman with a future. This period represented a genuine attempt to channel his energy into something constructive and to find a place for himself in the world outside the military. However, the same internal struggles that haunted him on land followed him out to sea. A new business, especially one that is physically and mentally demanding, comes with its own set of stressors. The pressures of making a living, combined with his ongoing battles with his TBI, schizophrenia, and paranoid thoughts, made it difficult to sustain the venture. The very boat that was supposed to be his salvation would tragically become entangled in the darkest chapter of his life. The dream of a peaceful life as a fisherman slowly unraveled as his mental health continued to deteriorate, and the vessel of his hopes would later be identified at the scene of an unimaginable act of violence. As Sean DeBevoise's struggles intensified, he felt an overwhelming need to tell his story to the world, to expose the truths he believed were being deliberately concealed. This led him to write and self-publish a book on Amazon under his new name, Nigel Max Edge. The book, titled Headshot Betrayal of a Nation, Truth Hurts, served as his manifesto, a detailed account of the events that he felt defined his life and his suffering. The title itself is a stark and provocative summary of his core belief that he was not just a casualty of war, but a victim of a deliberate betrayal by his own country. The book was his attempt to reclaim his narrative and present his version of events, unfiltered and raw. The description of the book on its Amazon page lays out his shocking claims in no uncertain terms. It is a narrative of extreme violence and treachery. He alleges that after he single-handedly killed a group of insurgents in Iraq, his own men turned on him. He claims they shot him 4 times in an act of friendly fire, and then, in a stunning act of cruelty, locked him in a warehouse and left him to die. This account of abandonment and attempted murder by his comrades in arms is the cornerstone of his story. It is a narrative that paints the U.S. military not as a band of brothers, but as an organization capable of the ultimate betrayal against one of its own. The book goes further, suggesting that his personal story of betrayal is part of a much larger, more sinister cover-up. The description hints that the U.S. military has a mysterious story that it desperately wants to keep hidden from the public. By publishing Headshot, Nigel Max Edge was positioning himself as a whistleblower, a lone voice of truth against a powerful and corrupt institution. For him, this was not just a memoir, it was an act of defiance. It was his evidence, his testimony, and his cry for justice in the court of public opinion, since he felt the official channels had failed him completely. The book became the foundation for the complex conspiratorial worldview he was developing. Writing Headshot was likely a deeply cathartic process for him, allowing him to organize his thoughts and experiences into a coherent, if deeply disturbing, narrative. However, it also served to further entrench his beliefs. By committing his story to paper, he solidified his version of reality, making it even more resistant to outside perspectives or professional help. The book stands as a tragic document, a window into the mind of a man consumed by trauma and paranoia. It is a testament to the pain he carried, and a chilling prelude to the legal battles and erratic actions that would come to define the final years of his public life, as he sought validation for a truth that only he could see. With his story of betrayal laid out in his book, Nigel Max Edge, formerly known as Sean DeBevoise, turned to the legal system as his next battlefield. He began filing a series of bizarre and sprawling lawsuits, attempting to use the courts to validate his claims and hold accountable the people and institutions he believed were conspiring against him. These legal documents provide a direct look into the depths of his paranoia. They were not focused on a single grievance, but were instead epic narratives that wove together his personal trauma with grand, far-reaching conspiracy theories. He was no longer just fighting for himself. In his mind, he was exposing a vast criminal enterprise that he believed was operating at the highest levels of power. One of the central themes of his lawsuits was the existence of a so-called white supremacist LGBTQ pedophile ring that he claimed was targeting him. This accusation is a jarring and confusing combination of different extremist ideologies, reflecting the disorganized nature of his thinking. He connected this alleged ring to a host of global and historical events, creating a web of conspiracy that stretched from the war in Iraq and the Abu Ghraib prison scandal all the way to the Jeffrey Epstein case. In his view, these were not separate events, but were all interconnected pieces of a single, monstrous plot, orchestrated by a shadowy cabal of powerful figures who were also, he claimed, responsible for the September 11th attacks. In these lawsuits, he listed a litany of alleged crimes and civil rights violations committed against him. He claimed he was a victim of human trafficking, kidnapping, torture, and multiple attempts on his life through poisoning. He accused various unnamed individuals and government entities of subjecting him to cruel and unusual punishment, unlawful searches of his property, and a denial of due process. These were not simple legal complaints, they were desperate cries for help, framed in the only language he had left, the language of conspiracy and persecution. Each perceived slight or difficulty he encountered in his daily life was interpreted as further evidence of the vast plot against him. His most recent lawsuit, filed on July 25, 2024, shows how his delusions had begun to infect every aspect of his life, including his medical care. He sued Novant Health Brunswick Medical Center, a doctor, and another individual, alleging that they were part of the conspiracy. He claimed that the doctors were using a secret LGBTQ code to communicate with each other and intentionally sabotage his medical treatment and obstruct his path to legal justice. This belief that even his healthcare providers were on the plot against him demonstrates the all-encompassing nature of his paranoia. It left him utterly isolated, unable to trust the very people who were in a position to offer him help. Among the many strange and confusing elements of Nigel Max Edge's legal filings, one stands out for its connection to a public figure country music singer Kellie Pickler. This particular claim adds another layer to the public's understanding of his deteriorating mental state. Nigel had at one point attended the 2012 CMT Music Awards with Pickler, an event that likely occurred as part of a program honoring military veterans. For most people, this would have been a memorable and positive experience. However, in Nigel's mind, this encounter was twisted into something sinister and threatening, becoming another piece of his elaborate conspiracy narrative. Years after the event, he filed a lawsuit that included the shocking and baseless accusation that Kellie Pickler had attempted to murder him. There is no public record or evidence to suggest any conflict or negative interaction between them. Instead, it appears that his paranoia had latched onto this prominent memory and reframed it to fit his belief that he was constantly being targeted. This tendency to incorporate well-known people or events into personal delusions is a common, though tragic, feature of certain mental illnesses. It lends a sense of significance and validation to the paranoid thoughts, making them feel more real and credible to the person experiencing them. This lawsuit, like his others, was filled with claims that seemed disconnected from reality. By publicly accusing a celebrity of attempted murder, Nigel was ensuring that his claims would be dismissed by most people as the ravings of a disturbed individual. However, for him, it was a logical extension of his belief system. If a vast conspiracy involving powerful government figures was trying to silence him, it made sense in his mind that a celebrity could also be a part of that plot. It demonstrated the complete breakdown of his ability to distinguish between rational thought and paranoid delusion. Every person he encountered, no matter how famous or how briefly he knew them, was a potential enemy. The Kellie Pickler lawsuit serves as a sad milestone in his mental decline. It shows how far his thoughts had strayed from a shared reality, and how his sense of persecution had grown to encompass every corner of his life. While the accusation itself is bizarre, it is also a clear signal of the depth of his crisis. He was not just a man with grievances. He was a man living in a terrifying alternate reality of his own mind's creation. A reality where even a moment in the celebrity spotlight was reinterpreted as a brush with death. This escalation in his claims foreshadowed a future where his distorted perceptions could lead to devastating real-world consequences. The bizarre and tragic story of Nigel Max Edge reached its devastating climax on Saturday, September 27, 2025, in the quiet coastal town of Southport, North Carolina. What started as a normal day in the picturesque community turned into a scene of chaos and horror. According to initial reports from law enforcement and eyewitnesses, a mass shooting unfolded at a popular local restaurant. The attack was as sudden as it was brutal, shattering the peace of the waterfront and sending shockwaves through the tight-knit town. The initial reports were chaotic, but it quickly became clear that this was a major incident with multiple casualties. The details that emerged were chilling. The gunman had allegedly opened fire from a boat, targeting the patrons of the restaurant from the water. This method of attack was unusual and terrifying, turning a scenic view into a direct line of fire. The shooting resulted in a tragic loss of life, with authorities eventually confirming that 3 people had been killed and another 6 had been injured. The community was left reeling, struggling to comprehend how such a violent act could happen in their town. Law enforcement immediately launched a massive investigation, working to secure the area and identify the person responsible for the carnage. The investigation quickly focused on 2 separate crime scenes. The first was the restaurant itself, where forensic teams worked to gather evidence and piece together the sequence of events. The second and more critical location was on nearby Oak Island. It was there that authorities located a person of interest who was taken in for questioning. Social media and news outlets soon began to connect the dots, identifying the suspect as Sean William DeBevoise, the 40-year-old Marine veteran who had legally changed his name to Nigel Max Edge. The boat used in the shooting was believed to be the same single-engine fishing boat he had purchased years earlier with money from his GoFundMe campaign. The man who had once dreamed of a peaceful life as a fisherman was now the primary suspect in a horrific act of mass violence. The vessel that was supposed to be his sanctuary had become an instrument of death. As the investigation continues, authorities are working to understand the motive behind the attack. Was it a random act of violence? Or was it a targeted attack born from the complex and paranoid delusions that had consumed Nigel Max Edge's life for years? The shooting in Southport represents the final tragic outcome of a long and painful journey from patriotic soldier to a man lost in a world of his own internal demons. In the wake of the Southport shooting, a community is left to grieve and heal, while the nation grapples with yet another senseless act of violence. The immediate focus is on the victims and their families, who are now facing an unimaginable loss. But as the initial shock subsides, a host of difficult questions emerge, many of them centered on the life of Nigel Max Edge. His story is a tragic case study in the devastating intersection of combat trauma, severe mental illness, and the failure of systems to intervene effectively before a crisis reaches its breaking point. It forces us to confront the challenges faced by so many of our veterans when they return home from war. The life of Sean DeBevoise, the young patriot, and Nigel Max Edge, the paranoid shooter, is a stark reminder of the invisible wounds of war. Traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress are not just acronyms, they are life-altering conditions that can change the very fabric of a person's being. When combined with a severe mental illness like schizophrenia, the potential for a downward spiral is immense. His bizarre lawsuits and his self-published book were not just random acts of a troubled mind, they were desperate signals, cries for help from a man who felt betrayed and persecuted by the world. The question we must ask is, were these signals seen, and if so, why was nothing done? The investigation into the shooting will undoubtedly uncover more details about Nigel's state of mind in the days and weeks leading up to the attack. Did he have a specific target in mind? Were his actions driven by the complex conspiracy theories he had spent years developing? Understanding his motive is crucial, not to excuse his actions, but to learn from this tragedy. His story highlights a critical gap in our society's ability to care for those with the most severe forms of mental illness, particularly when they are veterans who have been trained in combat and have access to weapons. We must do better at recognizing the warning signs and providing compassionate, effective intervention. Ultimately, the bizarre life and violent end of Nigel Max Edge is a cautionary tale. It underscores the profound importance of mental health awareness and the need for robust, accessible support systems for our returning service members. A soldier's battle does not always end when they leave the war zone. For many, like Sean DeBevoise, the most difficult fight begins when they come home. His story is a tragic testament to the cost of war, a cost that is paid not only on the battlefield but also in the minds of those who served. As we seek justice for the victims in Southport, we must also seek to understand the failures that allowed this tragedy to happen, in the hope that we can prevent another one from occurring.